Lost Companion. I'm Ken Dolan-Del Vecchio, and I'm here with my friend and colleague and co-author, Nancy Saxton-Lopez. And this is a broadcast that we do live every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then it's available for replay on Facebook and YouTube, and also as an audio podcast on a number of podcast outlets. And this is an opportunity for us to share some of the wisdom and recommendations that we gained from doing pet loss support groups for many, many years, really a total of more than 3 decades for the both of us, Nancy doing the bulk of that and actually starting a program in New Jersey many, many years ago. And we took that information, we melded it into a book called The Pet Loss Companion, Healing Advice from Family Therapists Who Lead Pet Loss Groups. And we now are bringing as much of that content into a broader sphere through this broadcast. So great to be with you. Also want to let you know this program is a friend of Dakin Humane Society in Springfield, Massachusetts. Dakin is a 501c3 community-supported animal welfare organization that provides shelter and medical care and spay-neuter services and behavioral rehab for more than 20,000 animals and people each year. Dakin was founded in 1969, and since that time, it has become one of the most recognized nonprofit organizations in Central Mass and a national leader in animal welfare. You can learn more about Dakin and, importantly, make a donation at dakinhumane.org. That's DAKINHUMANE.org. You can reach the two of us directly at our email, and we encourage you to do so because when you send us questions and comments and your own stories, we will often use them as the foundation for the conversations that we have in the broadcast, because we know that your stories are going to resonate with many, many, many people. So please do send us your stories, your suggestions for topics. And you can reach me at kenddv, my initials, Dolan-Del Vecchio, kenddv at gmail.com. And you can reach Nancy at nsaxtonlopez, that's nsaxtonlopez at csmpc.com. Nancy, want to get us started?
Yeah, we had some folks email us over the last week. They're heartbreaking stories as usual, because this is about, in this case, one is a young puppy who is very ill and will not be living a full life. She is still alive, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But there was another person who wrote in and did have a death, and with all different kinds of factors involved in these stories. And the first is Melanie, and we really thank Melanie for reaching out to us. She did adopt a young puppy in September, so this was recently. What's happened since then is this little puppy, and we don't really have a name, but this little puppy has developed some really pretty serious medical issues. And one is renal failure. And so here we are in November, and she's only had this little girl for a few months, which has really caused so much anxiety and stress and pain for Melanie and her family with this little girl.
And they've learned that she is probably not going to live very long at all, and so they're struggling with that. And of course, it's a very particular kind of loss. And where I'd start with this is to recognize that what they're dealing with is the stress of all of this medical care and also now anticipatory loss.
Exactly.
Or anticipatory grief, because they have to grieve the expectation that their puppy will have a normal lifespan. So that's a huge loss all its own, right from the beginning. And they have to prepare for the puppy losing its life at some point down the road, potentially through euthanasia, because it may be the case that she's suffering so profoundly that they have to make that decision about whether or not the quality of her life warrants her continuing to live given the suffering that she's experiencing.
Experience.
So it's a very complicated situation. And when we adopt a puppy, we tend to have all sorts of dreams.
Expectations.
Yeah, we have expectations, we have dreams for
Mhm.
the time we're going to spend with them, and we think about the time frame of their lives with us. And so letting it sink in that that's not
Mhm.
likely to happen. Of course, you never know for sure, but to be realistic with the consultation they're getting from their veterinarians, she's probably not going to live very long. And that's very, very hard. There's layers to that
Of
make it very
course.
hard.
Well, she was talking, and I'm going to not quote, but these were some of the feelings that she was going through: anger, pain, frustration, anxiety, a sense of doom, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Feeling robbed.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that this will be a short life with her puppy. No future memories. So, maybe she'll be here this Christmas, but maybe she won't be next Christmas.
yeah,
And so she's saying we're going to have to watch her die.
yeah,
And that is so heartbreaking to be love this little puppy so much. And yes, she was very clear, we're going to give her the best life possible in
sure.
the short time that she's here. But it is very emotionally draining. I mean, she said she had 15 vet visits in 6 weeks. Now that could have been even more so now because she wrote us, a few days ago, a week ago. So, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of uh, exercising all of these emotions and going to vets, and the amount of time that takes and the amount of treatment that this
Yeah.
puppy needs.
And the expense too. I mean, it sounds like that would be massively expensive.
Mhm.
And so all of this investment of all different kinds, and you know that you don't have that much time. I have a friend who, when one of my dogs died recently, she wrote, when we bring a dog into our life, we're signing on for heartbreak
Mhm.
10 years down the road. And so Melanie is signed on for heartbreak unwittingly,
Yeah,
much
right.
at a much sooner interval than that. And that, again, all these feelings of being cheated and angry, and all of that's grief. That's
Of
anticipatory.
course. It has now started anticipatory grieving and will be
Yeah.
until that decision may have to be made. And that goes back to, I think that this puppy was adopted, I believe, right?
Yep. Mhm.
So, I mean, and we've had these conversations in our podcast that when we decide to adopt an animal, foster an animal at some point that may be adopted, you buy an animal, um, that's their lifetime that we're signing up for,
Yep.
and no matter what happens. And so, she's doing everything possible to keep this puppy alive until that puppy can't live anymore. And she's willingly doing that. There may be some people out there that would not do that.
Oh,
I mean, we,
sure.
we know that. And
Yeah.
so from our experience over the years, and I have to give it to her. I mean, you and I would do that, but there
Well,
may
you're doing it
I'm doing it right now.
with
Yes, right,
your French bulldog, with Boogie.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with Boogie, I mean, I know that he has epilepsy. I know that he will have seizures, and hopefully, where the medication now is enough that will curtail that. But it'll take a few years off his life. We know
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
right? So, but I knew that going in, and I chose that.
Right.
Now, when Hank got sick. He got sick when he was 7, I believe, and then there were quite a few diseases. It was epilepsy, anemia, diabetes. I mean, he had all of these kind of dreadful chronic diseases at once. Did I do any? I mean, I took care of that little boy until I knew that he could not walk anymore, and it was affecting how he would urinate. And then we knew that we had to let him go. But that's the responsibility,
Yep.
that you take. And I know that Melanie's, like I said, very clear that she will give this little puppy the best life she can have during this period of time, but it's going to be grieving.
Well,
And
and it's the way I think about this is I'm imagining every all the time that you're spending with this puppy, you're giving them the puppy your love and you're cuddling them and you're doing all the things that we do with I have a puppy now who's 4.5 months old and
really,
she's a lot of fun and so balancing the joy of the energy and spirit of a puppy with the knowledge that you're going to lose them has got to be a very significant challenge. And I think that's really, in a way, at the heart of this. Like, how do you show them a bright attitude and
yeah,
give them a whole bunch of positive energy at the same time that you're grieving?
you're grieving, right, during the whole
Yeah.
process. And this goes into like some people, may adopt or, get a puppy or a little kitty or something. And then they could have a sudden death, right? So, and that's another part of having a young death, right? So, maybe they have just purchased or, adopted a young cat or a kitten, and something happens and the kitten dies, you
Well,
know.
one of the things that Melanie's story points out, the way I see it, is the incredible uncertainty that's present in all living beings,
Right.
for all living beings. There's absolute uncertainty about how much time they have, how much time we have, and that in this case, the one of the things that stands out for me is you know that every moment with this puppy is precious
Yes.
because there are going to be far too few of them. And if you can hang on to the idea that knowing that will help you to cherish them very actively, then that's maybe one of the lessons of this very tragic situation.
Mm,
And it's just very complicated, I think. And I've mentioned this before, but I refer to a book by Dwayne Elgin with some regularity. It's called Voluntary Simplicity. And one of the sections in his book he titles Let Death Be Your Friend. And
interesting.
the whole idea is that if we're aware of the finite nature of our lives and the lives of people we love, and in this case, the lives of the animals who we love and who enrich our lives, we are going to be far more present and connected and engaged in those relationships than if we hang on to the illusion that life goes on and on and on, which many people do in our society.
Right.
Many people have a
They don't think
very
about what's going to happen.
they don't think about the
Mhm.
fact that we're only here for what amounts to, even if we live a long life, a very short time. How many people have you known who are in their 80s or 90s and they'll say it all went by so fast?
Right, because the older you get, there's a time warp that we have, and time goes by much quicker
I'm
than if you're young,
I'm
and so
experiencing that
yes,
all the time.
and so all of a sudden you're like, "What happened?"
So the gift, if you want to go that far with the thinking, with this kind of situation is time is precious. I
Yeah,
mean, it's like with my puppy, I wonder, I just wonder how when I took her to the vet for her well puppy visit, it was incredibly gratifying to hear that she didn't have any problems because
yeah,
we had a
good,
puppy,
thank
one
God.
of one of our Chihuahua puppies who is no longer with us brought him to the first visit and was told he had a heart murmur,
Yeah,
which stayed with him his whole life and shortened his life a bit. And you just don't know. You have no idea what you're going to hear when you go for that first review, and you have no idea what's going to hit down the road. We just heard the story a couple weeks back about a dog who was 2 years old who ate something
ate
that
the word,
in a freak accident got
right,
caught in his throat, and that ended his life.
yep,
And so we just never know. We never know. But these people, Melanie and her family, they do know. It's a
yes,
painful kind of knowledge, but they do know. And so the challenge that is sort of, not as pressing for most of us, perhaps, is very real for them.
Yes, very real.
It's so real for them.
And we have to give Melanie, and her family kudos for doing what they're doing and taking care
Sure.
of this beautiful little puppy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so we thank her for sharing that story with us
And we'd
because
be happy to hear more as things progress. Like,
yeah,
we'd be happy to have her keep us posted.
right. And then we heard from Whitney,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of guilt issues around the situation that happened with Rambo, her cat. Um, and this cat was 15, but he was energized and
Yeah, it's fine.
active and healthy
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
all and running around and
Mhm.
just playful and they had decided to go out of town. Um, and they had a pet sitter, and Rambo died.
Mhm.
And so here it comes all of those questions. First of
Mhm.
all, it was sudden and 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 shocking, right? And traumatic because their cat Rambo was just so alive and so full of
Yeah.
energy.
No expectation at
No,
all that
no, and
he was even ill.
it was well, everything was good, and then
Mhm.
they go away, and then, the pet sitter calls and said, he's died.
Which sort of proves the point that we were discussing about how
He's
we
never
never know. We may think we've got a long time ahead with our pet, and circumstances well beyond our control intervene in a way that we would never have anticipated.
And so here the questions she had, right?
Mhm.
So what happens if we were home? Would it have happened if we were home because we would have caught it or we would have known or and was he scared? He was really
Mm.
attached to my husband and I. Was he too frightened with maybe a pet sitter? And this was no blame. She was very clear about that. But would that have caused a heart attack of some sort? Because I think that the vet determined that it may have been some kind of heart occurrence. Um,
But she also notes that they traveled a fair amount, so it wasn't uncommon for the
that's
cat for
right.
the cats to have a pet sitter there. It wasn't something that they were unused to.
No. And but the trip in the carrier, right? Getting the cat into the carrier to get to the vet, did that
Mhm.
promote a heart attack? What would have happened if nothing happened? Would he still be alive? I mean, all of these questions. She was,
Yeah.
actually looking at herself. What am I asking all these questions about? Should we have aborted him? Would there have been a different outcome if maybe there was an ultrasound? So, but those are such normal questions to ask when you this is sudden and
Yeah.
tragic and not,
Yeah.
and they felt so horrible and guilty that they weren't there for him. I mean,
Yes.
of course
Yeah.
anybody would. I remember Tashi dying, my first pug, and we weren't there. And I
Yeah.
even though
Same with my Jack. We were in
right,
we were
you
in
were away.
Barcelona. We got a note from the pet sitter that he had died.
And so when Tasha was 45 minutes away in the hospital, and when Ordell called, they said she's not doing well. And I think that frankly she had died then. And then they called
Mhm.
back a half an hour later and said she had died. And even though that was in 1989, and I don't agonize over this, but I just at this point I just wish I had been there with her. You
Yeah,
know,
well, that's it. It becomes these things become part of our story, right? They become part of the fabric of our lives. They come up regularly. I mean, major losses, often there isn't a day that goes by that they don't at least cross our mind.
that's right.
Certainly don't
Right.
hit necessarily with the grip of fresh grief, but in the beginning, these kinds of questions go, over and over. So Whitney's questions,
Are
feel
normal.
like
And she says, "I think I'm being a little crazy," but those are the questions you have, right?
yeah, so that I mean, it's so important to realize how normal that is and that you're not
Absolutely.
crazy, you're processing it. I sometimes will use the phrase, you're emotionally chewing on this. You just need to keep rehashing it over and over and over again.
Like,
And
how could this
so,
be? Well, part
yeah,
of that is the shock and the denial, right? This can't happen. This
yeah, because
he
it's
was
not,
running
I mean, you would
around.
never have expected it.
Right.
And there is no, we do better when there is some story that makes sense to us.
Right. And that's
We
why we chew on this, right? Because
Yeah, so eventually it's, like my Abigail's death recently, I would never have expected her to die. In fact, the vets didn't expect her to die. We had taken her to the vet 3 days before, and they didn't give her antibiotics. I mean, like, and then after it's over, one of the things that I always say to myself is, there's nothing, you cannot change this. You just have to get used to it. You can't change the fact of it. There's no way
no,
to go back. You just have to find ways to help yourself get
work
used
on
to
it.
the reality, yeah, that it happened. And and you need to ask those questions out loud, ask them to yourself in your own head and your own heart as much. And the way I think of it, you just do it over and over again, and it can make you feel pretty crazy, but you are absolutely not crazy. You
Right.
are, you're
You're
just doing what we
real.
do when we love somebody and lose them suddenly.
Right. And so it comes down to that eventually you can work. I've worked with people and they say, all right, I know now that that my cat, my dog, my fiance, I'm working with a woman whose fiance was killed and is not coming back. But with a sudden death, it takes a period of time to work through to that because
Mhm.
it's too shocking, you know?
Yeah, the discontinuity between knowing that they were presumably perfectly well to gone. I have a friend who came home one day from work, and very similar to this situation, and her cat was dead, and her cat was fine beforehand.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely fine. And she did have a necropsy done, and they said there was some kind of heart event. There was some
Mhm.
kind of cardiac event that happened that was not at all anticipated or pre-diagnosed. Like, there was no understanding of this, and made it very, very difficult because you keep wondering. And then what it also tends to do is it makes us wonder about so many other things in life. Like, we take a lot of things for normal and for granted
Yeah, sure.
that we really are not sure, are not guaranteed. They're not guaranteed to
No,
us.
nothing's guaranteed.
And so, yeah, nothing's guaranteed. And that's very frightening. And when we have a sudden loss, that becomes much more, we become much more aware of that, right? We become much more aware of how little we actually have in terms of knowledge and control about
And
many,
that
many things in our lives.
we don't have control.
Yeah.
We don't have control over everything. For certainly, we don't have control over death.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and that's hard. Now, what there was a complication too with Whitney that there had been very recent 4 other unexpected deaths in her
That's
family.
right. That's right. Yeah. So there's just a whole context of loss,
Yeah.
right? Her father's dog, and then an
And then
uncle, I believe.
a cousin,
Yeah.
a few uncles. There was a
And her
bunch
father's dog had died suddenly too, at age
suddenly both
5.
right.
So, I mean, all that's just
I mean,
again,
I
all this
don't even know,
uncertainty.
it's hard enough to deal with one loss, and one loss brings back others, but then you have other multiple recent losses. I'm I'm just I'm blown away how people can even function with that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
but yeah, that's part of this, part of what we've seen, and we see in others, and we see it in ourselves when the circumstances demand it. We're a lot more resilient than we might think we are.
yeah, right.
Most people are much more resilient. I have a friend whose son died
Oh,
of an overdose. He's part of the heroin epidemic. And that to me is the most terrifying, imagining that, because I have a son who's 29, is an adult out in the world doing very well and all of that. But But she said, with a great deal of wisdom, she said, people say to me, I don't know how I'd ever get over the loss of a child. And she says, and I say back to them, I don't know how I'll get over this.
Right,
I have
exactly.
no idea
I
how
don't
I'll
know
get
how
over
I'm
it.
ever going to get over this,
Yeah,
right?
and she just says, somehow you just keep going. That's the
Well,
thing.
well, right.
Keep
No,
going.
and actually, it's interesting because I have a friend that we had lost touch with. A bunch of us work together, and we found out that her son died suddenly and swiftly, and to find out that he actually choked, in a restaurant and
Wow.
it could not be, revived. And she said, that was what she said, I'll never get over this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you won't,
You
but
work
you'll
through,
live
I mean, you
beyond
work
it.
through enough to
You
continue to live,
right.
but
You live with that as part of your life story that you will always have, and it will always be something that is hard. I
yeah,
think it will always be
always
hard.
challenging.
But eventually we get to a place where it's
It's part
increasingly
of us,
more
but we
just
can
part of
function.
it's just part
Yeah,
of the way the world is for us.
right. I mean, the last task is to really integrate the loss
Yeah.
into yourself and to
The
be able
the last
to
task of
function.
grieving, yeah, is to integrate this into your experience of life and to keep moving
And she
forward.
did say also that her other cat is grieving, right? The
Yeah,
other
yeah,
cat
yep,
disappeared for a while,
yep,
and she's obviously they're not looking forward to the holidays, especially Christmas. And she was not going to. We talked about this last podcast. She's not going to do at all what they usually would do, right?
yeah. So
Um,
it's just something that people need to decide. A lot of times people will do that. They'll put a hold on the holiday, or they'll do it in a somewhat scaled down way. Whatever feels right is the thing to do.
especially with deaths around this time.
They're
I mean,
very fresh, yeah.
it's like
Very,
we
very fresh.
talked last week. I mean, everything's supposed to be wonderful and happy, and of course, people are not happy.
No.
And so we also want to really thank Whitney,
Yep.
for being there to send her story to us, and she said we could share it, and
Right.
that's
We send condolences to both Melanie and Wendy and Whitney and their families. I'm sorry.
Um, and all we can do is, like you said, we have to take care of ourselves. And during these difficult times, we will learn how to work through that and move forward the best we can, knowing that these animals were so key and important in our lives. But they do end up here, right here in the heart,
Yep.
and they
Yep.
and they never go away.
They stay with us. They're always with us,
Yeah.
and that's the gift of
Yeah.
having had them in our lives.
And actually, I just saw a TikTok the other day, and the gentleman was I guess a medium of some sort for animals, and the question was, do dogs stay with us? And he's and it was dogs, it could be cats, but and he said absolutely, even after death, they are with us. It was
That's
good. It was good to hear. TikTok,
how
okay, I know.
I feel that all the time. So we should let people know that next Thursday is Thanksgiving,
Right.
so we won't be doing a
Well,
broadcast then. We will return the following Thursday, which is the 9th. And so we'll be
29th.
back on the 9th.
29th.
Oh, is it the 29th? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
And for all of you in the US, happy Thanksgiving. For everybody
Thanksgiving.
else, please, have a good 2 weeks
Yep.
as best you can in considering what we're talking about. But we appreciate you listening to us, and please send in your questions or comments or stories. It's really important because to share them makes a big difference for others.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
Bye.